I was the man the internet dubbed the lunatic father on Twitter, yet there I was under the Maui sun, calmly telling my daughter I would never marry again. I brushed off every flirtatious advance and business card from high society socialites while quietly finalizing the legal restructuring of my billion-dollar empire. I realized that destroying my unfaithful wife and her lover was merely a chore, a side effect of a much larger mission. The only person who truly deserved my lifelong devotion was the little girl who once fell on the school field, skin torn and bleeding, only to look up and whisper that I was right about her mother being gone. My wife, Olivia Sterling, had claimed she was too overwhelmed with work to attend the school field trip. She even had the nerve to suggest that my daughter and I should stay home as well. Seeing the heartbreak in my daughter's eyes, I ignored my wife's warning and took her to the event myself. The moment we stepped onto the school grounds, I spotted Olivia center stage on the main platform. She was lounging on a sofa next to her first love, Jerry Miller, and his young son, looking every bit like a happy, nuclear family. Olivia gripped the microphone, lecturing the crowd about the secrets to balancing a brilliant career with a blissful domestic life. She kept stealing tender glances at Jerry Miller, their smiles suggesting a deep, private connection. The audience erupted in waves of applause, and Olivia beamed with a smug, self-righteous glow. Even a little boy at her side puffed out his chest, mimicking her arrogant posture. As soon as the floor opened for questions, I snatched a microphone and cut through her rehearsed speech. I asked loudly if the CEO could explain when she had acquired a second son and whether her actual husband was aware of this development. The crowd immediately erupted into frantic whispering as parents and students turned to stare at me with visible disdain. People began muttering about who this rude intruder could possibly be. One woman scoffed that I was likely just some jealous loser trying to get a rise out of a powerful woman. Another parent remarked that a billionaire like Olivia attracted plenty of delusional gold diggers looking for a handout. They called me shameless while the cameras rolled. Up on the stage, Olivia's face paled when she recognized me, but she quickly masked her panic with a cold, professional stare. Jerry Miller failed to maintain his composure, putting on an act of wounded indignation as he turned to Olivia to ask what I meant. I didn't even give him a second glance, keeping my eyes locked on my wife. I demanded that the CEO provide an answer to the question I had just posed. Olivia reached up to tuck a stray lock of hair behind her ear, a nervous habit she couldn't quite hide. Then, with the entire audience watching, she reached out and firmly grasped Jerry Miller's hand. She looked me in the eye and declared that her actions were the only answer I would get. Jerry acted as if he were the luckiest man alive, pulling her into a dramatic embrace while gazing soulfully into her eyes. The crowd gasped in admiration at the display. Several people whispered about how refreshing it was to see such a powerful couple showing their love so openly. People praised Olivia as the perfect modern woman, a titan of industry who remained fiercely loyal to her family. They looked at me with even more contempt than before. Someone muttered that I deserved the humiliation for trying to drive a wedge between such a devoted couple. The insults grew louder as people mocked me for getting shut down so publicly. They laughed at my casual clothes, calling me a loser who could never compete with a high-level executive. Everyone knew Olivia's husband was supposed to be a power player at Sterling Group, and they saw me as nothing but a nuisance. My phone buzzed in my pocket with a text from Olivia. She told me not to overreact and claimed she was just doing Jerry a favor by playing mom for the day. She insisted that little Caleb was a tragic soul who needed a mother figure. She scolded me for making a scene instead of listening to her excuses. I felt a cold smile spread across my face as I read her arrogant words. It was her very ambition that had once convinced me to step back and build her into the CEO she was today. I was the one who installed her as general manager and quietly managed the board to ensure her success. She had clearly forgotten that Sterling Group was my family legacy. I still held 75% of the shares, making me the ultimate authority. I pulled out my phone and sent a series of encrypted messages to HR and the legal team. I was ready to terminate her contract right there in front of the whole school. Suddenly, my daughter Sienna reached her breaking point and lunged forward to defend me against the jeering crowd. She screamed at them that the woman on stage was her mother and that I was the only husband in the picture. She pointed at Jerry and called him a homewrecker. The crowd only laughed harder, their mockery turning even more vicious at her outburst. People started whispering that the apple didn't fall far from the tree. They accused the young girl of being a social climber, just like her father. They pointed to the happy trio on stage as proof that our claims were nothing but pathetic lies. Jerry's son, Caleb, stomped over to us with a snarl on his face. He got right in Sienna's face and asked her who she was calling a homewrecker. He told us we were both delusional for trying to steal his family spotlight. The boy raised his hand to strike my daughter, but I caught his wrist mid-air with an iron grip. I looked past him at Olivia, who was standing just a few feet away. I told her this was her final opportunity to tell the truth. Olivia looked at me with a frown and waited a few beats before speaking in a voice like ice. She claimed she had no idea who I was and warned me that she wouldn't tolerate any more slander against her family. She threatened me with the full might of her corporate legal team. Sienna's face turned a deep shade of crimson as she cried out in pure shock. She begged her mother to stop lying and to acknowledge us as her real family. She asked Olivia how she could stand by and listen to people insult her father so horribly. The surrounding parents broke into another round of laughter, telling the girl to stop acting out her fantasies. They advised her to drag her crazy father away before the CEO decided to crush us like bugs. They reminded us that Sterling Group had the power to ruin lives. Even Sienna's own classmates began to look at her with newfound hatred. They called her disgusting and accused her of being a fake. They mocked her for pretending to be a good student when she was actually so manipulative. With tears streaming down her face, Sienna grabbed Olivia's sleeve and pleaded with her to stop the charade. She sobbed while asking why her mother was pretending we were strangers. She begged for just one word of defense against the cruel things being said about me. Olivia didn't hesitate to violently shove her own daughter's hand away. The poor girl stumbled back, her face a mask of pure heartbreak. Jerry Miller seized the moment to interlock his fingers with my wife's, giving me a look of pure, smug triumph. I saw the look in Jerry's eyes and realized he was fully aware of the situation. I pulled Sienna close to my side and told her that if her mother chose to be a stranger, then she was no longer a mother at all. I promised her that we were done with that woman starting today. Olivia's expression flickered for a fraction of a second when she heard my words. My phone buzzed again with another iMessage from her. She accused me of lacking empathy and reminded me that she was only doing this for the boy's sake. She argued that revealing our marriage would humiliate Jerry and his son. She claimed the boy would be bullied at school if the truth came out. She blamed me entirely for the chaos, saying it was my fault for not playing along. Olivia told me that the humiliation I was facing was my own doing and told me to take my daughter home. I couldn't help but laugh out loud at her arrogance. She had clearly spent so long in the CEO's office that she forgot who had actually put her there. A frantic teacher rushed over to break up the tension, announcing the start of the parent-child fun run. As we headed toward the starting line, Jerry Miller intentionally bumped into my shoulder. He wore a sickeningly smug grin as he passed us. He whispered that a loser like me deserved to be discarded. He claimed that only a real professional like himself was a fit for a powerhouse like Olivia. I scoffed at the idea of him being a career-oriented man. My HR department had recently briefed me on his background, revealing he was a complete fraud. He had only been promoted because Olivia pulled strings for him despite his utter incompetence. He knew I was the husband she was hiding, but he had no clue I actually owned the company. My legal team confirmed that the termination papers and divorce decree were ready for delivery. I stayed exactly where I was, determined to expose their fraudulent relationship to the entire community. I was going to get justice for myself and my daughter right here on this field. Olivia and Jerry were escorted to the VIP seating area as if they were royalty. A swarm of parents and school officials surrounded them, desperate to stay in their good graces. Olivia sat there like a queen, looking down her nose at everyone with a sickening level of self-satisfaction. Meanwhile, Sienna took her place on the starting line for the race. She gave me a brave little smile, and I cheered for her from the sidelines. But then, in a split second, Caleb Miller veered into her lane and stuck his foot out to trip her. Sienna went flying face first onto the hard track with zero warning. I sprinted toward her as fast as I could. Her face was contorted in agony, and her knees were shredded and bleeding heavily through her leggings. My heart felt like it was being crushed in my chest. The little brat stood over her with a triumphant smirk. Caleb taunted us, saying we deserved it for trying to mess with his family. I felt a surge of murderous rage and had to stop myself from lunging at the boy right there. Olivia stepped in front of Jerry and his son to block me. She told me to stop overreacting to a simple playground scuffle. I was shaking with fury as I pointed at my bleeding daughter, screaming that this was clearly a deliberate assault. Jerry Miller let out a slow, mocking laugh and pulled a wad of hundreds from his designer wallet. He threw the cash at my injured daughter, letting the bills flutter around her like trash. He told me to take the money for her medical bills and leave before things got worse. The parents in the crowd joined in the laughter, looking at us as if we were street trash. They turned back to Olivia and Jerry, bowing and scraping like loyal subjects. They remarked that this was the price of crossing people with real power and money. They blamed us for starting the conflict and said Sienna deserved what happened to her. Someone even joked that she should be grateful Jerry had paid for her broken leg in advance. They told us to take our money and vanish from the school grounds. While the school nurse patched up her knees, Sienna never took her eyes off Olivia, silently begging for a mother's comfort. Olivia deliberately looked in the opposite direction, acting as if we didn't exist. My daughter's expression slowly went cold as she reached out to squeeze my hand. Sienna told me I was right, and that she officially had no mother. Olivia's brow twitched for a moment before she shot me another look of pure annoyance. I ignored her entirely and turned my attention to the parents who had been shouting the most disgusting insults at my child. I scanned the faces in the crowd, calling out the specific names of their businesses. I identified the owner of the window company, the supplier of construction materials, and the factory owner. Their smug smiles vanished the second they realized I knew exactly who they were. I had every detail of their contract in my head because my company was their primary source of income. Every single one of them relied on Sterling Group to stay in business. I informed them in a flat, cold voice that all their contracts with my company were being terminated immediately. After a moment of silence, the group burst into hysterical laughter and crowded around Olivia for protection. They told everyone that I had finally lost my mind and was hallucinating power I didn't have. They mocked my claims of being the real owner of Sterling Group. They asked me who I thought I was to threaten their livelihood when Olivia herself hadn't said a word. They joked about calling a psychiatric ward to have me committed for my delusions. Olivia didn't laugh with them, her expression growing increasingly grim as she watched me. She stepped toward me and whispered that her power at Sterling was absolute and that I had no influence left. She told me I was embarrassing myself and commanded me to go home before I made things worse. She truly believed she had usurped my position. I gave her a long, pitying look before turning back to the crowd and Jerry Miller. I admitted that while Olivia held the title of general manager, she was never the one in charge. I told them all that the real power behind Sterling Group was standing right in front of them. Jerry laughed so hard he nearly doubled over, claiming he had worked for the company for years and had never once seen my face. He insisted that Olivia was the only boss that mattered. He called me a psychopath who probably didn't even know where the head office was located. He sneered that I likely couldn't even find the front entrance of the building. I didn't bother arguing with him because I knew my team was only minutes away. A low-level employee like Jerry only had access to the minor floors, while my office was at the very top. There was no way a man like him would have ever set foot on the 35th floor where I handled the real business. The crowd continued their mocking laughter, but Olivia stayed silent. The look she gave me was full of venom, a sure sign that her confidence was starting to crumble. Sienna's phone suddenly started ringing, and she let out a terrified shriek the moment she answered it. I could hear a stranger screaming through the speaker, calling her a manipulative brat. The caller accused her of helping her deadbeat father put on a fake show for sympathy. She dropped the phone in shock, and I realized that someone had already leaked the scene to the internet. A viral post was circulating with a completely fabricated story that made us look like the villains. To make matters worse, they had even leaked my daughter's private cell phone number. I turned my gaze toward Jerry Miller, who was watching me with a disgusting look of satisfaction. He mouthed the words, asking if I liked his little gift. Sienna began to shake as the notifications on her phone became a never-ending stream of hate and harassment. The phone wouldn't stop ringing with calls from anonymous bullies. The parents who wanted to impress Olivia took this as a sign to escalate their verbal assault. They told us that the internet had spoken and that trash like us belonged in the sewer. They threatened that I would be sued into poverty for impersonating a sterling executive. They laughed about how the company's legal department would take my home and everything I owned. One man looked me up and down and joked that a pretty boy like me could always find a sugar mama to pay my bills. The man continued his disgusting joke, saying I'd be crying in a mansion soon enough. Suddenly, 2 black luxury SUVs roared onto the school grounds, stopping right near the field. Someone pointed out the Sterling Group emblem on the side, screaming that the real executives had finally arrived. The sycophantic parents surged forward with renewed energy, acting as if they were part of the welcoming committee. They crowded around Sienna and me, their faces twisted with malice. They looked like a pack of wolves closing in for the kill. They told us our lives were over and that Olivia wasn't playing around anymore. They mocked us, saying the lawsuit would leave us with absolutely nothing. Some of them started filming us with their phones, looking for a viral moment of our downfall. A woman started a live stream, telling her followers that the scandal involving the boy toy and the CEO had a juicy update. She promised her viewers a front row seat to a billionaire crushing a commoner. Jerry Miller looked at Olivia with a beaming smile, clearly impressed by her supposed power. Jerry looked at me with pure, unadulterated arrogance, while his son Caleb mimicked his posture. Olivia looked surprised to see the cars, but she quickly hid her confusion. She hissed at me, asking if I was the one who called them and why I was escalating the situation. I didn't say a word, my eyes turning cold as I watched the scene unfold. Jerry Miller didn't wait for me to respond, shouting to the crowd that the legendary Sterling legal team had arrived. He bragged that they were invincible in court and were here to destroy me. He promised that Sienna and I would be leaving the school on our knees for our lies and impersonation. He genuinely believed he was the one who had summoned the power of the corporation. I finally broke my silence and laughed in his face. My departments had been feeding me live updates on their every move. Olivia stared at Jerry in total confusion, but he just gave her a cocky wink, completely oblivious to her growing dread. He had no idea he was walking into a trap. Jerry told Olivia he had taken care of everything for her. Olivia looked like she was about to scream as the group of executives stepped out of the SUVs. They marched past me and headed directly toward Olivia and Jerry. The lawyers bowed low to Olivia, claiming they were there on Jerry's orders to defend the company's reputation. Olivia's tension vanished instantly, and she gave me a smug, triumphant look. She truly thought her team was there to back her up. She pointed at Sienna and me, telling the lawyers to handle us. The crowd of parents immediately started jeering again, mocking my earlier claims of authority. They laughed at how my supposed power had evaporated the moment the real professionals arrived. They challenged me to repeat my claims of ownership while the lawyers were standing right there. They laughed about how quickly the tables had turned on me. One of the lawyers, a man named Mr. Miller, stepped forward and looked me over with pure disdain. He handed me a legal notice stating that I was being sued for $1 million for defamation. I looked at him and smiled, making sure my voice carried across the field. I informed him that his employment with Sterling Group had been terminated the second he walked onto the property. My chief counsel had wanted to handle this quietly, but I had ordered him to let the junior lawyers show their true colors. I wanted to see exactly which employees were loyal to Olivia's corruption. This was the perfect opportunity to flush out the opportunists in the firm. This was going to be the most thorough house cleaning the company had ever seen. The parents continued to call me insane, laughing at the fact that I was still playing chairman in front of real lawyers. They reminded me that I was about to be broke and likely in prison. Someone bet that I didn't even have $10,000 to my name. Olivia marched over in her designer heels, looking down at me with absolute contempt. She told me the lawsuit was inevitable and that my act of insanity wouldn't save me in court. She claimed she wasn't a bully, but insisted on defending the Sterling name and her husband's reputation. She offered me a deal, confess my lies on camera and apologize to Jerry, and she might drop the case. She wanted a total public humiliation to seal her victory. She leaned in and whispered that this was my last chance to save myself. She mocked me, saying that no one in the company even remembered who I was. I told her to her face that she was a shameless liar and that she knew exactly who was telling the truth. The mob of parents was outraged by my refusal, calling me an ungrateful dog. They demanded that the school have me removed and that the lawyers sue me for everything I had. Suddenly, the entire street was blocked by a massive motorcade of over a dozen black luxury limousines. The sight was so overwhelming that the entire crowd went silent as the cars lined the street. People began asking if they were dreaming, as the sheer scale of the arrival was unprecedented for a school event. Simultaneously, the doors of every vehicle opened in perfect unison. Dozens of executives in bespoke suits stepped out, radiating power and authority. The parents who had been mocking me just seconds ago were now speechless with shock. They recognized the chief operating officer, a man who was frequently featured in the national business news. They began pointing out the famous faces, including the general counsel, who was a legendary Harvard alum. They saw international consultants and top-tier management experts who only dealt with the most elite corporate matters. These were the true titans of Sterling Group. The parents wondered aloud why so many powerful figures were congregating on a simple elementary school field. One person shouted that Olivia must have called them in to support Jerry and his son. Jerry Miller started shaking with excitement, truly believing he was about to become the center of a corporate welcoming party. Jerry turned to Olivia and told her how moved he was by her incredible gesture of support. I felt a wave of cold amusement wash over me. Olivia didn't have anywhere near the status required to summon these executives. She was just as confused as everyone else. Olivia kept her eyes on me, her hands trembling at her sides as the reality of the situation began to set in. Jerry, however, was in a trance of joy, pulling her along as he straightened his tie. Olivia forced a fake smile onto her face and allowed herself to be led toward the group of top-tier executives. She tried to greet them by asking what brought such important people to a school inspection. The executives didn't even look at her as they walked right past. They left Olivia and Jerry standing there with their hands extended, looking like absolute fools. They were frozen in a state of utter humiliation as the crowd watched in silence. The chief legal officer walked directly up to me and performed a deep, respectful bow. He announced that he had brought everything I requested, addressing me clearly as chairman. The parents and teachers looked as if they had been struck by lightning. They whispered frantically to each other, asking which chairman he was talking about. They couldn't wrap their minds around the fact that these icons were bowing to the man they had just called a mad dog. The atmosphere on the field shifted instantly as a heavy, uncomfortable silence took hold. People tried to convince themselves it was all a giant misunderstanding or a mistake. Jerry Miller's jaw dropped as he watched the men he worshipped treat me like a king. Olivia looked like she was about to have a stroke as she watched the scene unfold. The junior lawyer, who had just tried to serve me with a lawsuit, was now visibly shaking. He stammered out a greeting to his superior, asking why the chief legal officer was there in person. My chief legal officer gave the man a look of pure disgust and told him never to address him again. He informed the junior lawyer that his career at Sterling Group ended the moment he stepped on the field. The man looked like he was about to burst into tears as he asked what his mistake had been. The chief asked him how he could be stupid enough to serve a lawsuit to the actual owner of the company. The junior lawyer looked at me with an expression of absolute terror. The reality of the situation finally began to sink in for everyone else on the field. People began whispering in disbelief, wondering if it was actually possible that I was the chairman. I ignored them and quickly reviewed the termination papers and the evidence of embezzlement. I gave my lead assistant a small nod, and he went to work immediately. A team of professional media crews began setting up cameras and lighting rigs right there on the grass. A massive branded backdrop was unfolded behind me in seconds. It displayed the Sterling Group logo and announced that an emergency press conference was now in session. The people who had been the loudest in their insults were now drenched in cold sweat. They tried to slip away quietly, but I signaled my security team to block the exits. We established a perimeter and kept everyone exactly where they were. I told them all that since they love a good show so much, they should stay for the main event. The business owners I had called out earlier looked like they were about to faint. They looked at each other before collapsing to their knees in a pathetic display of begging. They begged me for mercy, claiming they were just small businessmen who didn't know who I was. They pleaded with me not to destroy their livelihoods over a simple misunderstanding. I ignored their pathetic cries and fixed my gaze on Olivia and Jerry. I told them to be patient as I would deal with everyone in due time. I addressed the live cameras, noting that Sterling Group had been the subject of several trending lies today. I announced that as the chairman, I was here to set the record straight with cold, hard facts. I addressed the viral rumors claiming I was a social climber trying to manipulate the CEO. I told the audience that the reality was far more scandalous. I revealed that Olivia had been having an affair with Jerry Miller and had framed me to cover her tracks. I held up our official marriage certificate and had it projected onto the large digital screen for everyone to see. The bright red document proved beyond any doubt that she was my wife. The crowd gasped as the undeniable proof of our relationship was displayed in high definition. The audience was frozen in shock as they realized the magnitude of Olivia's deception. They began whispering about how she had the audacity to bring her lover to a school event while her husband was present. They realized they had been cheering for a cheater and a fraud the entire time. The tide of public opinion turned instantly, and the crowd began shouting insults at the unfaithful couple. The admiration they once had for Olivia was replaced by pure loathing. The news cameras zoomed in on their faces, capturing every moment of their public downfall. The photographers took dozens of close-up shots of their panicked expressions. Jerry Miller tried to hide his face and screamed about his privacy rights being violated. He tried to run, but my security team formed a wall of muscle that he couldn't possibly breach. I made it clear that no one was leaving until I was finished with my presentation. Olivia stormed toward me, her face a mask of rage and embarrassment. She screamed at me to stop and demanded that I send the media away immediately. She tried to threaten me with a divorce as if that were punishment. I just watched her spiral into a desperate rage before taking the pre-signed divorce papers from my lawyer. I slapped the documents against her chest and told her that her wish was already granted. I informed her that she was officially cast out of the Sterling family for her betrayal. She stood there as if she had been turned to stone, unable to process the total loss of her status. Eventually, she reached down to pick up the papers with a trembling hand. She screamed when she saw the terms, which left her with absolutely nothing from the marriage. My lawyer stepped in and calmly told her she was free to contest it in court if she dared. He reminded her that no one had ever beaten him in a legal battle. He gave her a cold smile, noting his perfect winning streak in high-stakes litigation. I nodded in agreement and turned back to the microphone to deliver the next blow. I announced that Olivia was officially fired from her position as general manager, effective immediately. I also announced the immediate termination of Jerry Miller and barred both of them from ever working for any Sterling subsidiary again. My words were being broadcast live onto every major digital billboard across the city. The entire population was watching her career crumble in real time. Traffic came to a standstill as people looked up at the screens to witness the historic corporate execution. People in the streets began cheering for the chairman's decisive action. They praised the way I had handled the situation with such absolute power. People were commenting on how she was a classic opportunist who had bitten the hand that fed her. The broadcast then zoomed in on her face as she screamed that she had built the company and wouldn't accept her firing. She looked utterly unhinged on the massive screens. She kept screaming about her title and her supposed importance to the firm. I looked at her with total indifference and reminded her that my word was the law at Sterling. I told her that she was nothing more than an employee I was choosing to discard. My head of HR stepped forward to announce that we had evidence of her embezzlement and fraud during her time as CEO. He informed the public that the company would be pursuing criminal charges against her in addition to her termination. Olivia's face went from red to a ghostly white as she heard the news. The HR head then turned his attention to Jerry Miller, exposing him as a complete incompetent who only had a job because of his affair with Olivia. The crowd gasped at the blatant nepotism and corruption. People began clicking their tongues in disgust as the full extent of the rot was revealed. The parents in the crowd started mocking them for being frauds who only cared about status. They realized that Jerry was nothing more than a professional homewrecker and Olivia was a puppet. They couldn't believe the two of them had the nerve to act like business icons. Every word from the crowd felt like a physical blow to the disgraced couple. Olivia's eyes were bloodshot from the sheer stress and humiliation of the moment. Jerry Miller looked like he was about to faint as he clutched her arm for support. Jerry began whining about how their reputations were ruined and how his son would never be able to show his face again. Olivia responded by striking him across the face with all her might. She had completely lost her mind, screaming like a banshee in front of the cameras. She blamed him for everything, saying his constant whining about his motherless son had led her to this disaster. She asked him how he could be stupid enough to ask for her help now that her life was ruined. She began physically attacking him, her hands clawing at his face and clothes. She rained blows down on Jerry while he curled into a ball on the ground. His son, Caleb, jumped in a fray to defend his father, and the situation devolved into a chaotic brawl. The two of them ended up ganging up on Olivia, returning her violence with interest. She was left bruised and battered on the grass with a broken arm, but not a single person moved to help her. The parents just watched with cold indifference, enjoying the spectacle of the two villains destroying each other. They mocked her for her failed attempt at playing a maternal figure to a boy who clearly hated her. Some people in the crowd shouted that they hoped the trio would just kill each other and save the world the trouble. I watched the violence with a numb expression before turning back to my speech. I announced that the final phase of my plan involved prosecuting every single person who had participated in the online harassment of my daughter. I revealed that my team had already identified Jerry Miller as the mastermind behind the viral smear campaign. We had proof that he had edited the videos and paid for the bot accounts that attacked us. I laid out every step of his calculated plan to destroy my reputation. My lawyers displayed the digital evidence on the big screen, showing the exact timestamps of Jerry's malicious posts. The crowd was horrified by the level of cruelty he had displayed toward a young girl and her father. They realized that he was a dangerous predator who had tried to ruin an innocent family. People remarked that Jerry had made a fatal mistake by targeting a man with my resources. They knew that Sterling's legal team would never stop until he was completely ruined. The crowd cheered for the justice that was finally being served to a man who truly deserved it. Jerry Miller finally understood the gravity of his situation and began to shake with absolute terror. His legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the grass, unable to stand under the weight of his own crimes. He crawled toward me like a pathetic animal, begging for forgiveness with tears streaming down his face. He sobbed my name and begged for a second chance to make things right. I looked down at him with nothing but pure revulsion before kicking his hand away from my shoe. I told him to stay as far away from me as possible so he wouldn't stain my expensive leather. I turned my attention back to the crowd of parents who had been so eager to join in the bullying. I told them that none of them were safe from the legal consequences of their actions today. I promised to hunt down every single person who had insulted my daughter on that field. The entire group of parents collapsed to their knees, as if they were a single organism. They begged for a way to survive, crying out that they had families to support. They started banging their heads against the ground in a desperate, rhythmic display of submission. I knew their apologies were fake, born only from fear of my power rather than actual regret. I signaled my assistant to play the security footage from the school's cameras on the big screen. I wanted everyone to see their ugly behavior documented in high resolution. The footage of them mocking my crying daughter was instantly uploaded to every major social media platform. The world saw their ugly, distorted faces as they ignored a child's pleas for truth. They looked like mindless servants orbiting their corrupt idols. The microphones had captured every vile insult and disgusting sexual comment they had directed at us. Their words were like poison, repeated over and over on the national broadcast. I decided that none of these people deserved a shred of my mercy. I threw a massive stack of legal documents onto the grass in front of them. I reminded them of my earlier promise and declared that Sterling Group was cutting ties with them forever. I watched as they realized their businesses were effectively dead. They stared at me with hollow eyes, their entire worlds collapsing in an instant. Without our contracts, they would be bankrupt within months and blacklisted by every other firm in the region. They were officially ruined, and they knew it. My security team hauled the weeping business owners away before they could touch me. The national Twitter trends were now dominated by the story of the Sterling Group chairman's revenge. People everywhere were talking about the downfall of Olivia and the total destruction of Jerry Miller. The press conference was over, but the legal nightmare for them was just beginning. My team was already filing hundreds of lawsuits against everyone involved in the harassment. They were going to spend the next several years of their lives in courtrooms and prison cells. I was driving Sienna to school a few days later when Olivia threw herself in front of my car. Her arm was still in a sling, and she looked like she had aged 20 years in a week. She was a hollow, broken version of the powerful woman she used to be. She sobbed through the window, claiming she had ended things with Jerry and begging for a second chance. She tried to reach into the car to touch me, but I pulled away as if she were a plague. I told her to get away from my vehicle. She turned her attention to Sienna, trying to use her injuries to manipulate the girl's emotions. She begged her daughter to convince me to take her back, claiming we were still a family. It was a pathetic, desperate attempt to regain her lost lifestyle. Sienna looked at her with a level of coldness that mirrored my own. She told her that her mother had died on that school field and ordered her to leave us alone. Olivia's face collapsed as she realized that her last hope for salvation was gone. I called my security detail and instructed them to use force if she ever stepped foot on her property. She was left on the curb like a piece of discarded trash as we drove away. The legal proceedings moved quickly after that, and the trial began within a few months. Olivia was convicted on multiple counts of corporate fraud and sentenced to a lengthy prison term. Jerry was hit with massive fines that exceeded his entire net worth, leaving him in a state of permanent debt. Even in prison, Olivia's reputation followed her, and she became a target for the other inmates. She was reportedly targeted by a gang in the prison and suffered a series of brutal beatings that left her permanently disabled. Jerry lost everything he had, including his home and his cars, yet he still owed millions of creditors. He was officially blacklisted from every financial institution in the country. Jerry's life was effectively over as he became a social pariah with no future. His son, Caleb, was forced to leave his expensive private academy and enroll in a struggling public school. The scandal followed the boy everywhere, making him the most hated student in every classroom. Caleb grew increasingly violent and unstable as the bullying in his new school intensified. He began taking his frustrations out on his father, screaming that Jerry had destroyed their lives for a moment of fame. He blamed his father's pathetic ego for their current state of misery. Jerry tried to explain that he had only targeted Olivia to provide a better life for his son. He admitted that he thought she was his golden ticket to a life of luxury and that he had used their high school history to manipulate her. He cried as he told the boy he never expected the plan to backfire so spectacularly. Caleb screamed at him to stop using him as an excuse for his own grief. He told his father that the kids at school called him the son of a homewrecker and treated him like filth. He described the looks of pure hatred he received from everyone. He cried about how people would cross the street just to avoid being killed. The boy's eyes were filled with a murderous rage as he stared at his father. He looked at the man who raised him with the same hatred one would have for a mortal enemy. He screamed that it was all Jerry's fault for being a pathetic social clown. Jerry could only sit there and weep as his son delivered a series of crushing verbal blows. Suddenly, the light in the room caught the edge of the kitchen counter. Jerry saw his own terrified reflection in the blade as his son lunged forward. He felt a sudden, hot rush of blood as the steel sank into his chest. His final breath was spent whispering his son's name in a state of total despair. I was sitting on a private beach in the Maldives in Siena when the news of the tragedy reached me. I had already made a solemn vow to my daughter that I would never bring another woman into our lives. My only goal now was to grow the sterling legacy until the day I could finally hand the entire empire over to her. While the impulse to turn the pain of betrayal into a weapon of revenge is a profoundly human response to being shattered, the most sobering lesson of this journey is that true victory is found not in the ability to break another person's spirit, but in the courage to refuse to let their cruelty rewrite your fate. It reminds us that it is far better to walk through life with a missing piece than a claim to a toxic wholeness that poisons the soul. For the greatest legacy we can leave is not the empire we build, but the sanctuary of safety and unconditional love we create for those who were once left. Ultimately, you in the moment you outgrow the need for their validation or their suffering, stepping into a light that is entirely your own and leaving the ghosts of the past to a darkness that no longer has a hold on you.